If your character makes the same mistake twice, it's realistic. If they make it 3 times, it's psychology. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jack Lawrence, award-winning and best-selling mystery writer and former therapist. And on this channel, I give you tips and tricks from psychology and my years of clinical experience to help bring life and depth to your plot, your characters, and your story. The truth about mistakes is that people don't repeat them because they forget that they don't work. They repeat them because at one point they did work. Patterns form around emotional relief, familiarity, predictability. Those 3 things create a sense of security and a sense of safety. One of the groups of people that I recognize this a lot in, because I did a lot of work with this population, is those of addicted individuals. They don't drink again because they forget how much trouble it caused. They don't forget that it impacted relationships. They don't forget that it nearly bankrupted them. They don't forget that it cost them jobs. They don't forget that it cost them freedom a lot of times with legal issues. They do it because at one point it was beneficial to them. At one point they got emotional relief from it. They got an escape. They got a sense of connection if they were social drinkers. The same can be said about any mistake. It's not that they forget that it can cause them problems, it's that they remember the good that it brought at one point. And the reason for that is that pain we recognize and understand feels a lot safer than change we don't. One way I described this to clients when I was working with people in therapy was, you'll stay in an abusive relationship, you'll continue drinking or using drugs, you'll continue to self-sabotage, because at the end of the day, you know what to expect. You know what the outcome is going to be with reasonable expectation. However, if you change all of that and you start doing the things that you feel you want to do, the healthier things, now there's fear, because what if I fail? And what if I can't maintain this and it all goes away and I lose it all? What if I'm not as strong as I thought I was? What if I have to feel emotions and things like that? That's much scarier than the consequences you've already faced. Because you face them, you kind of know what to expect from them. So what do I mean by there's comfort in that? Even destructive patterns can offer a person identity stability, right? I'm a drinker, I'm XYZ, whatever it is, you've attached your identity to that. The danger of switching your identity is that it's very challenging. And a lot of people will fold as a result, because if I'm not this, then who the hell am I? Right? So there's almost a grief that has to happen there, because when you change and that is no longer part of your identity, then who are you, right? So you tend to stick with that because that's who you are in this narrative that's been created, and so you stick with what already is. There's also emotional predictability. You know what the good is like, you know what the bad is like. There's nothing to catch you off guard. You're going to go through it, you're going to feel it, and you know what you're going to feel. So there's predictability there. Predictability is always safe. There's control illusions. This one is huge with addiction, right? I can stop whenever I want, I can control it, I can maintain it. The truth is, it's not the addiction that you control, it's the false perception that you have control. A lot of times, well, let me correct that, with addiction, it pretty much always comes from some form of trauma. And what do we know about trauma is the person has no control in that situation. All their sense of control is removed. So having something where they feel like they can control it, something that they do have power over, it creates a sense of safety, right? Because now they're getting that power and that control back, even though, particularly with addiction, we know that's not true, unfortunately. The addiction controls them, and that's why it's an addiction. So the idea is that if this pattern is broken, it destroys the self. So when you're writing a character who keeps making mistakes or keeps repeating things, that's more realistic than somebody who makes a mistake or something goes wrong and then they instantly just never do it again. So how do I usually see writers screw this up? Well, the big one is that there's escalating consequences without escalating awareness, right? So I've never worked with somebody, whether who's incarcerated or going through addiction or even in a family setting, a relationship setting, where the consequences are getting worse and they don't start to recognize that they have a problem. Now, that doesn't always mean that they're ready to address the problem. It doesn't always mean that they're ready to change the problem, but they are aware of the problem, right? They might justify it. They might try to say, for example, with addiction, well, I just need to drink less, or I need to only drink under these circumstances. They know that the drinking is a problem, but there's still that illusion that they can control it and they can do something to where they don't have to change their identity. They don't have to address something major. They can just do it a little bit less and the problems will go away. Again, unfortunately, that's not usually how it works. Some people can do that, most can't. But if there's escalating consequences and they don't recognize that there's a problem, it's super unrealistic. Even the people I've worked with that are most ingrained into their problem always are aware that it is a problem. And repetition must deepen the person's understanding, because otherwise then maybe they are stupid, right? Your character's just an idiot if the repetition is there. They're constantly making the same decisions, same mistakes, similar consequences, but nothing is changing and they don't even have a recognition, right, that maybe this isn't a good thing. It's super unbelievable. And it does make your character look kind of dumb. So to avoid that, make them aware. Doesn't mean that they stop, doesn't mean that they address it, doesn't mean that they change it, but they need to be aware of it and acknowledge it. So how do you write it correctly? Each reoccurrence should cost more. So again, using addiction just because that's an easy one that I know majority of people have experienced either with themselves or a loved one. When I worked in the addiction treatment, a lot of the counselors would always throw out the phrase or the analogy that a drunk driver, a person who's arrested for drunk driving, had driven drunk at least 100 times before they got pulled over, right? So you drive 100 times, tipsy, drunk, no consequences. You get pulled over, maybe you spend a few hours in a jail cell, then the next time it happens, right, you lose your license for 6 months. Next time it happens, you lose it for another 6 months and you're spending a week, 2 weeks in jail. Happens again, you lose your license, right? There's an escalation there. Same thing with abusive relationship. First time, maybe they scare you. Second time, a bruise. Third time, a broken bone. Fourth time, a hospital visit. There's an escalation to the same mistakes. You're revealing more. You're revealing more about why this person is stuck in this pattern, what it is that they're afraid to have to address so that this can be fixed and resolved. You're revealing more about the other characters in their lives, what keeps them along for the ride, why do they stay around when this person is, falling apart. You're learning more about motivation, all of those things. And the options begin to diminish, right? You can only have so many consequences before your options are pretty slim. So all of this is happening over the course of your book. Now, that's not to say that it has to be resolved by the end, but all of this is taking place, depending on what it is that your character is constantly repeating and what your plot is. But definitely, there needs to be awareness and acknowledgement, escalation and consequences, and revealing more of the motivation behind it. Because the change really only happens when the repetition becomes essentially unbearable. When I worked in addiction treatment, but really it applies to any systemic therapy or therapy in general, is the notion that people will only change when the problems are bigger than the benefit. So if drinking, for example, reduces anxiety and stress, but drinking is also getting you arrested and causing your family to fight with you, and you're constantly having to go to rehab, eventually that's going to be a bigger issue than trying to relieve whatever through the drinking. So that's when your character is going to notice, hey, maybe it's time to really do something different here. If you found this episode useful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, because every week I drop psychological facts and tips to bring depth and realism to your characters, your story, and your plot.